Welcome to the Relocated South African, the podcast that explores the journeys of South Africans building lives and careers around the world. I'm your host, Jan Hugo, speaking to you from Lagos in Portugal. Today I'm joined by Cornis Van Der Lugt, a South African sustainability expert who has built an international career working across Europe and with organizations such as the United Nations on issues of corporate responsibility, sustainable finance, and the green economy. Welcome, Cornis.
Good morning. Good to meet you, Jan.
Yeah, it's nice to have you. Cornis is also, like me, a member of the Lusaka network, and is currently based in Geneva, Switzerland. So where did you grow up and study?
There is a moment in every relocation journey when the excitement gives way to admin. At Apostle, we help South Africans at home and abroad get the documents and visas they need for travel and immigration, whether it is a police clearance, an apostille, an abridged certificate, or visa paperwork. We help turn that moment from overwhelming to manageable. Visit apostle.co.za or email clients at apostle.co.za. Documents with convenience.
I grew up mostly in the Western Cape. I was born in Port Elizabeth. My father came from Port Elizabeth, Uitsnaek, so that's where I get the Dutch family name. My grandfather was born in Delft in the Netherlands. Him and his family decided at the beginning of the previous century to move to South Africa, leaving Europe because of war in Europe. And my mother was from Cape Town, and that kind of French Huguenots. Her grandmother had a cousin who was married to Jan Smuts, and then there was the typical in Parel, the divisions between the nuts and the subs in the family.
Okay.
Once the grandfather kicked Jan Smuts out of the house because of a political argument. So we always had this back and forth between Port Elizabeth and Cape Town. But my father was a reverend in the Dutch Reformed Church, and for most part in my school life, we lived in the Western Cape in Montague. So I'm basically on the border of the Little Karoo and the Boland, and then went to study in Stellenbosch. And I don't know, I always enjoyed international life. I was always, maybe it's my Dutch blood, but I was interested in traveling, seeing the world. As a student, I got somewhat involved in the anti-apartheid movement. I was with the first group of students from Stellenbosch who went to Lusaka to have discussions with the ANC in 1989. And then after 1992, I went to work in the transition government in Pretoria. In diplomacy, and started attending international conferences. And eventually in 2000, I got a job at the United Nations working in the environmental field, because I often studied developments in the environmental field, climate change, etc. And I did my PhD in this area as well, global environmental governance. So I went to work at the UN Environment Program in Paris, in France, a division that works with the private sector on the role of business in society. And much of the discussion on responsible business globally, had seeds coming from, among others, South Africa. The whole debate about boycotting the apartheid economy, foreign multinationals had dilemmas. Do we stay in the economy, like companies like Shell, or do we pull out of the country, companies like Kodak? So I, in a sense, built on that background, but worked from Paris with business and different industries, associations on voluntary initiatives for how you deal with environmental issues and how you use natural resources sustainably. So that got me involved in international standard setting, and I progressively moved to focus more on what I would call sustainability accounting, making the link with financial and management accounting, and responsible investment. And finally, my Spanish wife convinced me to move to Geneva from Paris. So that's where I've been in Geneva in Switzerland since 2011.
Wow, that's amazing. We got to go back first. So as a Afrikaans guy growing up in, I bet you, can you say the new name for Port Elizabeth? I can't, but
Rebecca, something like that.
Anyway, so growing up in Port Elizabeth with a Dutch Reformed pastor as a father, Was it university that awakened the thoughts around politics? Or where did that happen at school already?
I guess it's partially how you grow up, where our parents always took us around South Africa. They said, people get very excited about going overseas, but before you go abroad, you need to see your own country. My father, when he was a student, he studied theology in Stellenbosch in the 1950s, and he, for instance, went to London and worked in London for 1 year before he came back and started operating as a reverend. So he's, had that exposure and that mindset they gave to us as children. And then when you go to university in South Africa in the 1980s, people forget how difficult things were. We were in a state of near civil war. So if people complain about, events of the last 30 years, they forget how bad things were before 1990. Yeah. And I, like many, before you go to university, you do tests and they say, what are you interested in? And the man in Stellenbosch said to me, do you want to go and study law? Well, he initially said, don't you want to follow in the footsteps of your father? And then I said, no, I know too well the ins and outs of that career. I don't want to become a dominie. So he said, why don't you go and study law? And first year in law, I quickly realized this is not for me. I'm bad with names. So memorizing all those court cases with names and titles and concepts was difficult. But I loved philosophy and went on to study philosophy and politics, and later came business and economics. And we had student protests in those days. There was a cultural war. There was the alternative Afrikaans music. My oldest brother wrote the song Full Fray, which became the theme song of the Full Fray concert series by Kerkorrel and the gang. And they came to Stellenbosch, and Foster was on the phone with the university rector and saying, you should not allow that concert to happen on campus, as he did with other main campuses across the country. So the concert was held off campus, and those were dramatic experiences. One cannot be melancholic about those times, but that is part of what makes us special today abroad. I think we've experienced the transition in society from an authoritarian system to a democracy.
Oh, that's fascinating. You mentioned this visit to the ANC in Lusaka. I still recall. I'm a little bit older than you, but sort of reading about it. But we were kind of indoctrinated, and the media that we were fed was censored by the government. There was no real free press and so on. So what was that like? Were you welcomed there? Was it a good conversation?
That time, these discussions were starting to happen behind the scenes. It was the time when Frederik van Zyl-Slabbert and some of our colleagues from Stellenbosch went to Dakar as well. So we had good discussions. The exec was meeting at the time in Lusaka, so we met Thabo Mbeki and colleagues, and we had more discussions with Steve Trete and members of the Youth League. We also met them in Harare, and we were led by a head of the Department of Biblical Studies, Professor Johan Kingon, who later transferred that department into a department of knowledge management. And many years later, as a hobby, started flying. He became a pilot just for fun. So he shares that with you, with your helicopter flying. But so there were great minds involved, and we had very interesting discussions. You could also see, there's a certain mindset of people who were in exile and people who were part of the liberation movement inside South Africa. So there were different perspectives there, and there were tense moments, but we overcame that. And in those days, sometimes you had instability. The security police also found ways of finding out what we discussed. They were also aware of what we're doing. I think preparations were underway then for big announcements in 1990, which happened on my birthday. That was a good birthday present. And then the dramatic events of the 1990s. I think the world was, amazed at how we managed to do that transition peacefully.
Well, that's absolutely just fascinating. And Working for that transition government, what was that like?
I was initially very excited going to Pretoria, going to work in government. What strikes you if you work in government is all the facilities, the infrastructure you have at your disposal. Working in the foreign ministry meant we were coordinating various government departments. At the time, the UN Convention on Climate Change was created, and I had to coordinate our participation in the Climate Change Convention. So I was coordinator of our delegation who went, for instance, to Kyoto in Japan as we finalized the Kyoto Protocol to the UN Climate Convention. So working with different government departments, we then hosted a developing country association, a coalition meeting of the non-aligned movement, which was chaired by then President Nelson Mandela. And I was on his delegation who went to New York for his last appearance at the UN General Assembly in New York. He spoke just after Bill Clinton, who also got a standing ovation. That was the time of the Monica Lewinsky affair. And the international community, obviously, on that day decided, let's give the man a break. And Nelson Mandela also got a standing ovation. So we traveled and I met fascinating people inside government. There were people coming from the old TBVC, the homelands governments. There were people who came back from exile. There were some people from the old UDF movement. So it was a fascinating melting pot, a mix of people. Some high performers, highly talented people, and some severely underperformers. So it was clear that in any new democracy, we're going to have difficult times. But I have some incredible colleagues who, after all these years, still work in government. So I've worked in different sectors in my life. People generalize about governments, but you know, there are pockets of innovation where people do incredible things, and there are pockets where people get stuck in corruption and are totally underperforming and not meeting standards, and bad things happen. So you see all that diversity working inside government as you see when you work inside a big company.
That is really interesting. I'm just thought when you spoke about the United Nations and traveling there with Nelson Mandela, which was fascinating. I spoke to Jan Alles. I don't know if you remember Jan Alles. He said he interviewed Mandela 14 times, but he said when things changed, the way South Africa was welcomed abroad was just something unbelievable, from being a complete no-no to being, number one. Was for him as a journalist. He said it was just incredible how South Africans were welcomed after the changes took place.
There was that initial honeymoon period of the first 10 years, and people still remain fascinated about the South African experience. I, in my career, always stayed in touch with academia as well, did some research on the side, and stayed in touch with Stellenbosch University. And you still see students from Europe or North America who come and do postgraduate studies in South Africa. One thing is for the incredible weather and the scenery, but they also want to experience the society and learn more about our historical experience. So people have still that fascination with the South African history. It was a dramatic time, and it remains an evolving story, isn't it?
Absolutely. And my question would be, before we move on to living abroad, but as a philosopher or a person who studied philosophy and politics, what's your view? Did you forecast what was going to happen and where we were going to be today? Did you foresee that? Are you surprised?
If you studied politics, one of my old professors studied, focused on politics of African countries. And it was all, historically, we also looked at transitions from authoritarian rule in Latin America. And it was all very predictable. Once a country gets independence or democratizes, then you have an old liberation movement that governs. And there is the initial honeymoon period. And then, all the ideals start to meet reality, and you often have cases of corruption creeping up. And this plays out over decades. We've seen this happen with various African countries. Our neighboring Zimbabwe was a prime example. In 1989, we still visited Harare, and parliamentarians told us about the Zimbabwe success story. In those days, you could more or less still talk about a success story. We're looking at Zimbabwe. But we all know what happened to Zimbabwe. So it was kind of predictable. At least one hoped that South Africa, going through its transition so many years later, would learn the lessons of the past. And I think our society is more complex. Our infrastructure was more developed. You would know our financial system was more developed, connected internationally. So I was always positive that things will not collapse totally, but the Zuma years was a particularly bad period. So we're going through all those birth pains that was to be expected. But hopefully, we're also learning lessons from other parts of the world. Remember, at that time, one motivation for us to take that big step in 1990 was also the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Cold War coming to an end. So we were always connected with developments abroad. And people should also remember it was not just a black-white, a racial issue. At that time, in people's mindset, many thought we're fighting against communists. So there was that foreign intervention involvement as well. The wars in neighboring countries, Namibia, Angola, there was that element to it as well. But I remain hopeful about the long transition that we're going through, and it all comes down in the end to quality of leadership. And today, at least from what one hears behind the scenes, fixing our infrastructure, somebody said the other day, behind the scenes, you have working groups, and it's a bit, the mindset is like in the 1990s. Let's stop just pointing fingers, but work together to fix things. And that means the public and the private sector has to work together. And in South Africa, government will not do it on its own, and private sector will not do it on its own. So we can really innovate and come up with examples for the rest of the world of how to fix these things. It remains, like SAA always said, a world in one country. You see that diversity and all the extremes, including the rich and the poor in South Africa. And therefore, South Africans are so attuned to really come up with really innovative solutions and thinking out of the box, because our daily life is about being exposed to these extremes.
I have to ask you, and I said to you in the beginning, we don't talk politics, but I mean, one of the themes that that I find that comes out of every conversation, I've just done a little piece on what I found in the conversations in Australia with people in Australia, is the safety aspect. So can South Africa work without solving the crime issue, call it by its name? But, there's a lot of people that feel unsafe in the country. If you think about Geneva, you never feel unsafe. I don't feel unsafe where I am now. So that's a huge positive. And people leave because they say they feel unsafe. They feel unsafe for their children. So is that a government responsibility, or is that something that everybody must fix together? What is your view? I mean, we don't have to delve too deep, but I hear what you're saying in terms of solving and that people have to work together. But it seems to me that is the one critical aspect that needs to be resolved somehow.
Yes, it's clearly not just a government responsibility. It is a collective responsibility. Also, key thing is not to just throw money at the problem and focus on crime. Why is there high crime? There is unemployment. And the people who suffer most from the crime are the poor people who live in townships. That's where most of the killings happen. Now, at the end of the day, things become relative, right? The whole world has migration. There is war in the Middle East. We have immigrants coming to Europe. I myself, I'm an immigrant from South Africa, only a South African passport, living in Europe now for 25 years. But anywhere in the world, I always tell people, if I visit Johannesburg, it's like me visiting Rio de Janeiro. In Brazil, there are certain suburbs where on a Friday evening I would not go. But to fix these problems, you need to get your economy right, create jobs, and fixing all of that, it starts with your education.
Mm.
So to fix crime, it starts at the creche. Is there sufficient infrastructure when your education you provide to poor kids when they're young? My wife is Spanish. She works at the World Health Organization, and she will always remind me the most critical part of your development as a human being is age up till age 6. From before birth, the health of the mother, and then the baby up till age 6. That's when your brain is physically still growing and developing, and your mental capacity, all of those things are severely influenced by what you experience in life up till age 6. And what I see in Switzerland is the wonderful infrastructure they have to give people quality education, starting at your local creche. In your neighborhood, there is a public creche with a kitchen. Kids get good food. There are tools to play with for the kids. The creche considers the level of income of the family. If you earn less as parents, you pay less to go to the creche. So there is that fundamental education and civility among Swiss citizens. So that's where it starts, where people learn why it's not a good thing to steal and how do you solve problems. So if we want to fix a crime issue in South Africa, part of it is the collaboration and fixing the broken windows. But it's not going to be just building walls and arming ourselves.
My sense as well.
It starts with the creation of jobs and with education.
Very true. Oh, wow. That's so interesting. Let's go back. Living in Paris, what was that like? Are you a French speaker now?
Yeah, when I was a student in the 1990s, I did some research. I had 2 scholarships to study in Germany and the Netherlands, so I had to learn German. And that was fascinating. I had a DRD scholarship, and I was in a group with 10 students from China who already spent a year in China studying German. So you had to, as an Afrikaans speaker, within 3 months, you could learn German. For instance, the vocabulary is a lot easier if you have a Germanic language. But the Chinese students were like mathematicians, following all the rules and the grammatical rules in learning German. So that was a fascinating experience. And then going to Paris, I had to learn French. In our office, we had people from all over the world. So we spoke mostly English, but my boss was a French woman, a director. She was the first woman who in the 60s did an MBA at INSEAD Business School. A fascinating person. She was really my mentor in those early days. And slowly I learned French, but the Parisians speak a very fast French. So they're very intimidating. It was a lot easier since I lived in Geneva. They speak a slow French. It's a lot easier to learn French when you live here in the Swiss Romande. But Paris, yes, culturally, it's a fascinating city, a romantic city. I was based there when I met my wife. We were both working in the UN. We met at a conference in Salvador in Brazil. And eventually she convinced me to move to Geneva because I'm from the Western Cape. I love mountains. And at some point, Paris is a little bit flat.
Yeah.
You have the Sacré-Cœur, but it cannot beat the Alps when you live in Switzerland. Seeing the mountains, that was a big attraction. Geneva is better for outdoor life. Paris is fascinating for culturally, and I love food. And the French are absolutely passionate about food. So you pick up French mannerisms like using bread to clean your plates, to have that wonderful sauce when you finish your food, and experiencing good French wine.
Good cheese.
But of course, now my Spanish wife introduces me to good Spanish red wine.
Oh, of course. There's even good red ones in Portugal.
I once went to Lyon, and my French wasn't so good. And I went to one of the traditional restaurants, and I like veal, and they gave me the menu, and I saw something that looked like veal, and I put my finger on it and said, I will take this. Now, I don't eat offal, and I got this wonderful plate. It was tête de veau. So it's the brain of the calf that they do with the mayonnaise sauce. And apparently it was the favorite dish of Jacques Chirac. You would have it with a big beer on the side. I swallowed down half of it. I didn't want to offend the chef, but that's the sort of experience you have if your French are not so good and you pretend to be better than you are.
Trust me, living in France for us as well was, I have a very basic vlees and aardappels palate, and so living in France, and oh my word, when they bring the lapin, that I just couldn't. To this day, I haven't eaten rabbit, and I haven't eaten frog's legs, and I'm not into snails and funny French food, even though I love the country and I love the culture. But yeah, that it's an acquired taste, I guess.
Well, you have wonderful fish in Portugal.
Very much so.
And in Spain as well. And my Spanish family love the wonderful fish we have in South Africa. The only recommendation from their side is we have this bad Anglo-Saxon habit of drowning our fish in butter. And the Spanish say, no, replace the butter, you use olive oil.
Yeah.
It's healthier and it's tastier. So for my health as well, it's good to cut on butter. So it's interesting to see the cultural approaches, but they have a good appreciation of the fantastic fish we have in South Africa.
And I mean, you talk about, so obviously you speak Afrikaans, English, French, German, and you speak Spanish as well.
A few words from my father-in-law. I get some what they call malas palabras. He uses plenty of swear words. But, you know, we have an 11-year-old son. He was born in Geneva, so he's a real Genevois. But I always spoke Afrikaans with him, and he's in a Montessori school where they do English and French. And then at home, he speaks Spanish and Afrikaans. So he's processing 4 languages every day.
That is incredible.
And I just persisted. Somebody stopped me at an airport one day and said, how do you do that? Because I have an Afrikaans son and he wants to switch to English all the time. And I said, you just have to be hard-headed. And if he asks you something in English, you say, what? Because, you know, it's a loss for me of diversity if you lose your ability to speak the Germanic language. The philosopher Hegel said you can only philosophize in German because there are certain concepts, Gesellschaft or whatever, that are truly Germanic, that have a special meaning. So if you lose your access to German and Dutch, Flemish, it's a real loss for diversity. So being able to speak Afrikaans, I think there's more appreciation to that as well today in European German-speaking countries, the Germanic language countries, to play with and use this language.
Yes, that's actually quite fascinating, and I mean, it must be fascinating for you, the different cultures. I just think, you know, we went to Spain. It's across the border an hour for us, but we went to Sevilla, and we were there playing golf and just getting used to the culture of, you know, starting late. We like to eat early, so the restaurants don't open till 8 o'clock. All of that, you know, you're an hour away from the border, but it's just completely different cultures, which I find fascinating about Europe. But it must be more so for you living in a place like Geneva, where there's so many different cultures.
Yes, Switzerland as well from a food point of view, because there's the German side, the French side, and the Italian side. You know, you have fantastic pizzerias here in Geneva. You get good Italian food as well. I mean, I see us South Africans abroad, we find ways of staying in touch with our own culture. I mean, I don't like being one of those people that just stick to your own community and you don't get to know the foreigners. You really need to get to know the locals. People often say the Swiss are a bit cold, but once you learn the language, it becomes easier and you get to know them well. I've also seen, just in terms of being South African abroad, there are things you miss and you find ways to stay in touch. I obviously got my son to join the local rugby club that is part of the French Federation. He started playing rugby. Eventually he stopped. I couldn't force him to continue, but he liked tennis more. But the rugby community is one thing. The other thing is the church community. There are in big European cities Dutch Reformed congregations. There's a big one in Luxembourg. There are many in the UK. In Geneva, we have a Protestant church. It's the Church of Scotland, where I'm an elder and I coordinate Sunday school. So my child is there in Sunday school. I think of the things my parents did when I was young. Those are ways that people shape communities and help each other out. But important for me is you don't just stick to one community or an Anglo-Saxon community, but you experience the European continental attitude, approach to things. I also stay in touch with my Stellenbosch University alumni network. We since COVID, we have twice a year an online wine tasting where you have a winemaker from some wine cellar in the Stellenbosch area that presents a talk, and you order your wine in advance through an agent from Germany to get delivered at your house, your apartment, and you do a wine tasting with a presentation by the actual winemaker, everything online. And some of the participants in those events are also Europeans who went to study in South Africa and had great experience and came back to Europe.
I think that's amazing. One of the other things that we often hear is when people go abroad, the first thing they do is they go for the soft landing. They meet South Africans. They go on these South African groups abroad, and it's good. I don't think it's a bad thing. My sense is you have to put yourself out there. People aren't going to come to you, and you've got to meet the other people. You're living, as you said, you're kind of a guest in their country, and you've got to embrace the culture and be part of it. But it's not going to come to you. You have to go out and do it. And it feels like that's what you were saying about living abroad as well.
Yes, you embrace the country, and we know we're all immigrants, right? Since 2022, I worked in an American company, Standard & Poor's, on responsible investment. And we have a new CEO, a woman from Ireland, who once described how she lived in the US and how she was very tense because her visa was about to expire and she wasn't sure if working for the company when she was younger in the US, she'd be able to stay in the US, coming from Ireland. And I just thought, you have no idea, because, I'm from an African country, and all the hassles you have to go through over your life, applying for visas and always thinking about that residence permit that has to get renewed, or that working permit. I've been playing this game for the last 30 years. As immigrants, you have to get used to that and find ways also for people to adapt and interact. And all countries struggle with immigration issues. We talked about crime in South Africa. In Europe, you realize how things are relative. In France, people complain about growing crime in smaller cities in different parts of France. In Spain, they complain about young unemployed men coming from North Africa and gangsterism. In Spain, problems with crime. So the world is changing. There's always been migration. We have to learn to deal with it better. And it's exciting to get to, you have to adapt to the country where you're living while staying in touch to the degree that you want. I've come across somebody in Australia that never wanted to go back to South Africa and didn't want to even discuss South Africa. So there are those people as well who feel that they've run away from something and they don't want to look back. But I'm not like that. I think with our business network as well of South African entrepreneurs, our society is slowly normalizing and people come and go, as is the case with any country. In the UN, I had colleagues from all over the world, colleagues from India, and nobody ever accuses them of having left India. They all remain proud ambassadors of their own country, and our South Africans can be the same.
I think so. I think that's definitely, and I think the Lekker Network's doing an amazing job, because that's my experience is that it's such a positive network about South Africa. I've never once heard anything negative in any interaction there. I don't know if that's your experience as well, because I think that's the only way to go forward, is to be positive and not let the negatives drag you down.
Yes, it's a matter of, glass is half full or half empty. And I think if you're able to say the glass is half full without being naive, just a positive mindset boosts your energy levels, because a negative mindset drains your energy.
No, that's absolutely true. Just a question around cost of living in Switzerland. People always say it's a really expensive place to live. Is that your sense of Geneva compared to other cities that you've lived in?
Yes, people will always say Scandinavia is very expensive and Switzerland is very expensive. Within every country, there are more expensive or less expensive parts. In Germany, people would always tell you Munich is the most expensive. In Switzerland, there are certain cultural things, like they have a local fish here on the lake, a freshwater fish that they love, filet de perche, and they serve it in a restaurant, and it's bio-friendly, etc. And you will pay an enormous price for it, like a big steak. But my Spanish family, if they present it with this, my father-in-law tells the waiter, where I come from, we throw this fish back into the water. It's a little thing without a special taste. Value for money, things are much more affordable in the southern European countries. So Switzerland is expensive, and sometimes I think they go overboard. Their medical system, there's a good support as well with medical insurance, but they also have a lot of expenditure on medical examinations, tests and things. But at least, if you work here, the salaries are adapted for that. If you can earn in the stronger currency, of course, you have a wonderful time if you go back home and you visit South Africa, because you can do so much more back home on vacation with a strong European currency.
No, that's absolutely true. You touched on the medical. There is a state medical as well, but as well as private, or is it all private?
There is a public scheme system as well, yes.
I mean, these are things that come up in conversations. People leave, they start looking at all the different things and so on, and medical is obviously a really big thing, insurance, cost of living. So that's fascinating to hear about Switzerland. And exactly as you say, you look at Portugal. I think Portugal's even cheaper than Spain, but I always joke with my daughter when we go out for dinner. I take a picture of the bill and I send it to her in Dublin, and then I get a really angry meme back because what we pay for a bottle of wine, she pays for a glass of wine sometimes. So the South is a lot cheaper. Yeah.
You have some Swiss who take up offers to, go for dental care to some Eastern European country, and the trip, overnight stay and flight, it's cheaper than having the treatment in Switzerland for dental care. So you have those instances. But as we also know, I've seen over the years Germans moving to South Africa to retire in South Africa, Somerset West, wherever, because with their pensions, they can do more in South Africa, and they work with the assumption there is, from the private hospitals, a good quality healthcare available as well. So there are those Europeans that on their old age immigrate to South Africa.
Yeah. Cornis, and I mean, you've now lived and worked with people from all over the world. I'd love to hear your opinion on why are South Africans so successful abroad?
I think what you'd hear from any successful person is that it's not a picnic. It didn't fall out of the sky. People work very hard. I think generally the people who come abroad are curious and they have a strong work ethic, and they are reliable. I also think just being South African, people tend to be exposed to diversity. What you see, for instance, in Eastern European countries, the culture is still very homogeneous. People don't quite know how to deal with immigrants. Whereas we are used to these extremes, it constantly intensifies us to incentivize us to think differently out of the box. I think that's where the mindset of an Elon Musk comes from as well, having grown up in South Africa. So I think we have a good innovation ability coming from this diverse background. But settling abroad for any citizen is not a picnic. It takes years, and it takes paperwork, and it takes getting to know the local community. And there are times when you struggle. I mean, my wife and I currently, because of the Trump wars and the impact of artificial intelligence, me and my team were retrenched last year. So I'm in the process of looking for a new job. My wife, many of her colleagues lost their work at the UN because the US government of Trump withdrew their funding from the UN agencies. And that created a negative economic impact for the whole of Geneva. So we go through difficult times. It's not always a picnic.
Yeah, I think
So in that sense, the support from family back home is also very important. You talk to your family, your parents on a weekly basis, and you supporting them, of course, remains very important.
Yeah, I mean, that one doesn't even think about that something can go wrong, and this family line draws through every conversation. Because migrating in Europe is not a big thing because you're an hour or 2 hours away on a plane if you go live in another country. But South Africa is very different, especially people that move east, west, go to Australia, New Zealand. It really is far. And when things go wrong, it's okay. It's difficult even when things go right. Okay. But when it goes wrong, it's very tough for people. So I hear what you're saying. And in the process, would you consider going back to South Africa?
Well, my wife and I always work with the idea that when we retire, we'll kind of do half Spain, half South Africa. So spend time with the family in Catalonia, south of Barcelona, and spending time with the family in the Western Cape. I still visit South Africa at least once a year and teach sometimes with Stellenbosch Business School. So we're thinking of that retirement model.
Okay. Yeah. So, but I mean, you still want a career in Europe. Obviously, you can do private consulting given the amount of experience you've got. Is that an option now?
Yes, consulting, advisory work. We all have to get used to the impact of artificial intelligence. In this field, I can see the South Africans who specialize in IT. People are very innovative. So there's opportunities for us. But the advanced IT developments also brings the risk that those that didn't get good education get further left behind. So we need to make sure in South Africa as well, in our education system, if we want people to excel in the IT field, it again goes back to fixing the school system, getting that right.
That's very true. And you've been in Europe for more than 20 years. What do you miss most now when you live in Geneva about South Africa?
What I see every year when I go home, it's like an energy boost. Europe is fascinating. When I worked in Paris, every time I flew from Cape Town back to Paris, people said, that's not fair. It's like going on a holiday, whereas I was going back to work. But what you also realize is just being back home, the sun, the scenery, the friends. Last year, I went to my first high school reunion, matric reunion in Montague. It's an energy boost. And it makes you look back at your life in a different way, and you come back with new enthusiasm. So that's a great stimulation. What you also learn is your children become locals. I look at my son as a South African, but he's half Spanish, and he thinks of himself as a Swiss. So you have to make peace with that, but at least they have that diverse exposure. There are things you miss, including Braaivleis and great sports events and the weather. But you also have ways in which you, as I said, you stay in touch online, and you have local sports events and meet up ad hoc with South Africans. I see my Spanish wife meeting up with fellow Spaniards. That's also a very important community to tap into. So we all have that dimension.
Absolutely fascinating. I mean, you're you're a true international citizen, but you keep your roots, and I think that's absolutely amazing. And I honestly think this initiative of the Lekker Network is going to be huge in the future. When they talk about overseas being the 10th province, which I think is absolutely fascinating.
But, with our child, what I would like to do is for him not to be just Swiss, but I expose him to South Africa as well. So when we go there, I'd like to take him on a safari, or I would like to show him what life looks like in a township, so that when he thinks of the world's problems and solutions, he also he's not just a Swiss person who knows the fairy tale clean street of a Swiss neighborhood, but he's also seen the diversity and the extremes of, for example, our country at the tip of Africa. Because that's going to make him a stronger person in his own career. So I expose him to our roots.
Absolutely. 2 last questions. Thinking back over your career where you are now, would you have done something differently knowing what you know today?
In my career, I worked in different sectors. There's a bit of a journalist in me that's interested in everything. I want to find out how things work. So I worked in government. I worked in the United Nations. I spent 10 years as a consultant after I did an MBA in Paris. I worked for the Fortune 500 company for 4 years. And so every 7 to 10 years, I made a radical change, and I'm at one of those transitions again now. So, it has ups and downs. It's not a picnic, but it's been fascinating. I don't think I would have done it any different.
Awesome. And if a young Cornis came to you today and he said, I'm now finished my studies, what do you recommend I do? Should I go overseas? Should I build a career in South Africa?
I think a question for many is, what should I study? People ask, is it worthwhile going to university? Because in the age of AI, they would say the secure jobs are the ones the plumber, the gardener, the chef in the kitchen. These can be well-earning jobs. In Europe, these are well-earning jobs that cannot be replaced by AI.
When the excitement meets the admin, Apostle is here to help. We help South Africans at home and abroad with documents and visas for travel and immigration. Visit apostle.co.za or call us on 011 083 9830. Apostle, documents with convenience.
So people will ask more critical questions about the value of university education. In South Africa, everybody dreams of maybe you need a university degree, but that's not a given. In Europe, they have very good systems to educate people in other fields and other types of qualifications. What I've just seen from my life, as I said to you, I'm not a typical quant, I'm more of a qual. And you need to combine studies in a professional field like engineering or accounting, finance, whatever the cases may be. Combine that with your passion for other things, the arts, whatever the case may be. This combination strengthens your ability to secure your career as well. Yeah, because in our social sciences, in the arts, if you're only qualified in this domain, there's a small elite that becomes superstars. But for most of us, you need to diversify to kind of hedge yourself and secure your job opportunities in the longer term.
Very, very true. Very interesting. I interviewed a lady in Canada, South African, from Stellenbosch, studied engineering, and she's just built a AI platform for the mining industry. It's called minegpt.ai, and it's just fascinating when you hear what that can do, but it's still a person with an engineering background who didn't really know IT and was able to build that, and it's turning it into a business. So I agree with you. I think there's interesting times ahead, and it's all about the choices that you make early on, getting good advice. So fascinating. Cornis, thank you so much. Thanks for your time, and I really appreciate you getting up early in Geneva and being available and sharing your story. I think it's fascinating. Thank you so much.
It's spring here. Thank you to you. I look forward to seeing more of your podcasts.
Excellent. As always, if this episode resonated with you, you're welcome to share it with someone who might need or want to hear it. And you can find more episodes of the Relocated South African wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.